As a follow-on to two videos I've recently made about the reasons why Japan invaded China, and another video about the reason why China should be grateful to the USA, there have been a few questions and I'll attempt to answer them here. Wherever you are, welcome to another of my takes on China. So, first of all, on the topic of why China should be grateful to America, so many people have pointed out that the US provided the Flying Tigers from 1941 until the end of the war to help overcome the Japanese air superiority. And they did a great job. All this is true. And there is no doubt whatsoever that China is, as it rightly should be, extremely grateful, and it has honored the Flying Tigers in many different ways. However, the Flying Tigers were not US military. They were volunteers. And if we're going to call them what they really are, mercenaries. Now, this is not a bad thing. They were, in my opinion anyway, definitely fighting for a just cause. They fought incredibly bravely, and they did so very well. But let's not get that fact mixed up with a reason why China should be grateful to the USA. The Chinese government at the time were paying the Flying Tiger pilots. However, in July 1941, those that wished to do so were incorporated into the US 10th Air Force. Those that didn't were able to continue flying under the Chinese payroll. Now, this event occurred 7 months after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Once again, it shows the US did not help China until they needed to, even though many US citizens did. China, though, has not made the distinction, and it does thank the US for their contribution. So it's true that the USA helped China in the Second World War, but they did so because they shared a common enemy after Pearl Harbor. In the First World War, Japan was US's ally. They offered no assistance whatsoever to China, despite parts of China already being occupied by Japan. Also, some parts occupied by the US too. Wuhan, Guangzhou, Shanghai, among others, had US territories. Another thing that's not widely known and often left out of the history books is that the US did not help China to remove Japan from the country. Russia did. The Russians went into northeastern China, Dongbei, in huge numbers, and their invasion lasted 10 days longer than what the West considers the end of the war in Asia. It finished on the 20th of August because despite the emperor issuing a declaration to the generals, they refused to comply. It was Russia's forces which brought an end to the war in China, in the same way they beat the US into Berlin in the West. The US would just like us to think it was them. And here's one more very interesting snippet of information. While the Russians were taking over that region that we call Dongbei, they also went into the Korean peninsula. They were routing the Japanese there until the US stopped them. Remember, the US and Russians were on the same side at this time, and for reasons I have not yet found out, the US asked the Russians to stop at the 38th parallel, thus creating a division that we now know as North and South Korea. Russia, once again, took control of what was still in the West, known as Port Arthur, and held it until an agreement was made to return it to China in 1952, Communist China. Nothing the US has ever done has been for the benefit of the people of China. Let's look at some of the things they have done historically and why. The Opium Wars were Britain and the USA enriching themselves at the expense of a backward country. When China lost them, they also lost Hong Kong. Warren Delano, Franklin Delano's father, made a fortune selling opium, as did other well-known names such as the Astor names, the Forbes and the Cabots, and many more. The Boxer Rebellion was quelled by the Eight Nations Alliance. The US was one of them. And after they finished, they went on to ransack the old Summer Palace, as well as extracting 30 million taels of silver from the Chinese government in restitution. Now, that was the equivalent of a year's tax income for the entire country of China. I think I made this point clear the other day, but for some people in the comments, it wasn't clear. The only reason there was ever a Japanese military capable of invading China was because the US and UK made it so. They provided military hardware, training, and support. Historically, there was nothing the US did for China that China ought to be grateful for. But let's take a look at more modern times. The opening up in the mid-70s was not for the benefit of China. It was so the US had a counterbalance for the USSR. They had a hope it would expedite an end to the Vietnam War, and they wanted trade with the largest population on the globe. China did not access the World Trade Organization because of the largesse of the USA. It was because the USA wanted more access to Chinese goods, and because they hoped that they could change China's ideology in order to allow access to more of their economic influence. They failed at that, and even as recently as 2018, Trump has declared this to have been a US mistake. The mass creation of jobs in industry in China that US claim is because of them has enriched China. But if that was true, why isn't India and Bangladesh getting the same enrichment? And the reason is that when cheap labor came to China, instead of squandering it on pet projects and periodic wars or unnecessary elections, China opted for stability and investment. China has built supply chains, infrastructure, educational, transportation, and telecommunication systems. It was China's people's hard work and the government's frugal use of resources that helped grow China, not the United States. One more reason the US business came to China was to enrich themselves. Look at the profit margins Walmart, Apple, Tesla put onto their products, all sourced as cheaply as humanly possible in China. They pushed costs down, they drove margins up, and they made a few elites extremely wealthy while impoverishing millions around the world. Now, several Americans have also told me that China should be grateful for the Navy, which keeps the oceans safe for China's international trade. I find it very hard to reconcile myself with that. The idea of power projection, threats, postulations, frequent incursions right up to and sometimes across the border of both maritime and air borders, these are not keeping the seas safe for trade. These are threats. These are standover tactics, and they're no better than the mafia arriving and telling us that if you don't pay insurance, you'll get your windows smashed. That's what they're doing. So I stand by what I said. China still has nothing to be grateful to the USA for. And with that, I'm closing this one off. Please feel free to leave comments, and I will answer them in the comment section. But I'm going to move on to different topics from now on. This one is now closed. And please, while you're at it, don't forget to like, share, and if you think it's worthwhile, please also check your subscription button. Seems that some people are still reporting to me again that they've been mysteriously unsubscribed from my channel. I hope that's not you. Thanks very much again for watching my take on China. I will see you next time. Bye for now.